Hello there, I'm that Metroid guy. There was a comment that was made a short time ago on my community post about the Morkin tribe of the Chozo. The idea is that they were stupid for returning to planet ZDR without inspecting all of the Chozo for signs of infection from the X parasite. This view comes from this Chozo archive in Metroid Dread, where we see an infected Chozo standing before Raven Beak. This scene takes place as the X was unleashed on ZDR, sometime after the Chozo had left planet SR388. This Chozo is very clearly infected thanks to the black aura and the glowing white eyes. It should have been fairly obvious that something wasn't right just by looking at the victim, and by all accounts, it should have been spotted immediately. Or should it? Before we fully get into this, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It would help me grow and get more people talking about Metroid. My goal for this year is 10,000 subscribers. That's a huge number, so share these videos around and I'm sure we'll get there. First off, we're going to be looking at this topic from a purely diegetic perspective, meaning in-universe. We're not going to be covering any themes or any other real-world subjects from that angle. We are also only going to be looking at the English version of the Metroid franchise, because I don't speak Japanese, and it is a valid form of the continuity. Alright, let's roll back to the start of this whole ordeal. A small group of Thoha Chozo, a tribe of the Chozo who were known for their scientific prowess, discovered the deadly X-parasite on planet SR388. This was kept a secret, but was ultimately shared with other members of the tribe to spread awareness of this far greater evil. It was discovered that the X can mimic and use the host's skills, appearance, and memories to ensure its reproduction and spread. With no natural predator or a way to counter this threat, the Thoha Chozo feared that if the X were able to make it off the planet, let alone into a population, chaos would ensue. It was this reason for the secrecy, even going against informing others of the Thoha Chozo outside of this group, located on planet Zebes. To combat this possibility, the Thoha manufactured the Metroid, due to their mastery of science. The Thoha arrived on SR388 and unleashed the Metroids upon the X. They performed spectacularly against their prey, enabling the Thoha to establish a colony on the planet, constructing mines and research facilities. That was until an unforeseen side effect from the environment of SR388 occurred within the Metroids. It caused them to mutate and undergo metamorphosis, evolving into more advanced forms of their now natural life cycle. This drove away the Thoha people, making them evacuate and contact another Chozo tribe, the Morkin. This tribe was more versed in combat and aggression. There were already Morkin warriors present with the Thoha at the time of the SR388's colonization, but these were presumably killed in the evacuation and containment of the Metroids in the lower levels of the planet. This left the surviving Thoha to call for the Morkin. They were called to assist the Thoha in destroying SR388 entirely, and the Metroids along with it. Raven Beak, the leader of the Morkin, executed the entire Thoha tribe on the planet bar one, for he had ideas of his own for the Metroids: weaponization. The reason for one Thoha being spared was due to the Thoha's ability to control the Metroids, at least in their larval stage. So the lone Thoha Chozo, Quiet Robe, was kidnapped and taken to ZDR to make preparations for gathering Metroids. It was later that the X-infected Chozo would reveal itself, causing the downfall of the Morkin bar Raven Beak, who managed to contain the X in the Elan area of ZDR. Now, as the Thoha were retreating from the Metroids, they had sealed the creatures away behind locks to prevent them from coming to the surface, and so not allowing the Metroids to prey on the X. While the additional Morkin were on SR388, it's clear that one member became infected due to the lack of recent Metroid predation. This Chozo would have to have been with the others to get to ZDR via a spaceship, so it should be blatantly obvious that this specific Chozo was infected if it looked like this. But not so fast. I'm going to recall Metroid Fusion's opening. Samus was on SR388 and became infected herself by the X, but she didn't immediately turn. Samus didn't even know what she was attacked by until later on. After what I can estimate to be a day at most, she still wasn't fully turned. What could the reason be that works in both instances? Well, it's the case of Patient Zero. I'm going to immediately preface that I am not at all a biologist or an expert in virology, parasitology, or any other related fields of science, but I believe I'm roughly correct in what I'm going to say. Scientists, actual scientists, feel free to correct me. What I suggest is that the X struggles with infecting new species, especially ones not native to SR388 and ones far more complex, like humans and Chozo. I believe this is true for any parasite or virus. they have to be familiar and compatible with a host's biology to infect it in the first place. That's why it's rare for viruses, parasites, and the like to jump from one species to the next, unless given prolonged exposure or a mutation. I'm horrifically simplifying that, but that's the basic idea. The X would be no different. In the case of Samus and the infected Chozo, they would be the first of their kind that we know of to be infected by the X, and so it has no familiarity with either of their genetic makeup. It takes some time to crack the code, but when it does, the host succumbs to the infection. Then when that X reproduces, it and its offspring will have a considerably easier time infecting new hosts of that species, as it is now familiar with that anatomy. While we don't have the exact incubation period for the X infecting its host, this perfectly lines up with the time frame of the events in Fusion and Dread, where the X are unleashed. Samus is infected, but doesn't fall to it thanks to the Metroid vaccine. However, the surgically removed pieces of her suit are infected due to her suit being biomechanical. These pieces are sent to the BSL station, where it forms into the SAX and breaks free from containment, knowing the human genetic makeup and enabling it to infect the humans aboard the station with ease. And due to the delayed response of Samus to get to the station, the X would have had plenty of time to figure out the anatomy of all the creatures aboard and multiply with no restraint. What helps is that the majority of the creatures on the station are natives to SR388, and so the X would naturally have familiarity with those creatures due to sharing the same ecosystem and the process we mentioned before likely having already occurred. It would be hypothetically the same for the X in Dread. The first Chozo infected was fine at first, much like Samus, due to the X being unfamiliar with the host's anatomy. Unlike Samus, the infected Chozo would unfortunately meet its end by the X after landing on planet ZDR, as considerable time had passed by that point. That is when the X was unleashed, infecting several Chozo and animals on ZDR, explaining why the X were able to instantly take over when released again, as they were familiar with the fauna. As a reminder, the X reproduce asexually, so all genetic information that an individual X has will be passed down to its descendants, not among each other. The X don't function like the Flood from Halo, where information is shared into a hive mind. In this sense, the X are surprisingly grounded and believable in how it functions. This is the process of evolution and natural selection on full display, albeit drastically accelerated. So with this, we can safely say that the X incubation period is longer for unfamiliar organisms, while being near instant for those the X are familiar with. Now, the other point is, why weren't the Chozo tested for the X? Well, I think this implies that Raven Beak didn't even know the X parasite existed in the first place. This is supported by the fact that the discovery of the X parasite was kept a secret between a small group of Thoha Chozo, and based on Raven Beak's actions on SR388, he didn't know that the Metroids themselves existed either. I say that for a few reasons. First, it was the Thoha tribe of the Chozo that created the Metroids, not the Morkin. The latter is also never depicted to be present in any of the stories relating to the creation of the Metroids, not even in Samus Returns where the Morkin were introduced. There is also the trait of the Metroids that causes them to see the Morkin as hostile. Giving the Metroids this characteristic would not be something the Morkin would do or want for obvious reasons. Second, if Raven Beak knew that the Metroids existed before the Thoha massacre, he would have gone to the planet way earlier to take them for himself and likely wouldn't have immediately killed 99% of the Thoha tribe on the spot. It was a sudden action, as if he had just learned of something incredibly valuable, which the Metroids are. As to Raven Beak, they are a symbol of power. If nothing else, the events we see play out would have happened way sooner than they did. Additionally, so it is clarified, the Metroids on SR388 went feral after the space pirates first took over planet Zebus, but before the events of Metroid Zero Mission, as confirmed by Yoshio Sakamoto himself. This, by extension, confirms when the Thoha massacre occurs, being at the same time. I know I said we would look at things from a purely diegetic standpoint, but I felt that this was important to clarify. Third, given how he speaks throughout Metroid Dread, Raven Beak doesn't seem too knowledgeable about the Metroids. It feels like he's learning on the go, coming up with theories on his own as the game progresses. This could be a deliberate diversionary tactic, but I don't feel that this is the case given Raven Beak turns out to be mostly correct in his assumptions. To reiterate this important point, relating to the X, it was the Thoha Chozo that discovered the X, which only the higher-ups at Zebus knew about. Given how dangerous the X are and how Raven Beak values power, it would have been essential to hide the existence of the parasite from him, as it's clear that the Thoha don't trust the Morkin. From my point of view, they have an alliance only for mutual gain, such as for resources, aid, and traversal between spaces. The Thoha even kept the X a secret from the Galactic Federation, who had no major negative aura about them at the time. That was how important it was that this information be kept secret. Moreover, Raven Beak wasn't present on SR-388 until he arrived bringing reinforcement Morkin warriors to aid in the containment of the Metroids, as the majority of the ones that had been with the Thoha during the Metroid Rampage were presumably killed, and so any Morkin that would have known about the X would not be alive to inform Raven Beak, and on top of that, the Metroids were the priority. Lastly, Quiet Robe and Raven Beak. Why were they able to be taken over by the X so rapidly if they have a longer incubation period for unfamiliar beings? It all goes back to that first infected Chozo. Every X that is seen in Metroid Dread is a descendant of this individual, and so every X on planet ZDR will know how to infect the Chozo. I know that was a lot to take in, but to summarize, Raven Beak was not aware of the Metroids nor the X due to the Thoha Chozo keeping these a secret, so testing for infection would not have been issued.
And you know nothing about containment. You have demonstrated complete disregard for even the most basic protocols!
Raven Beak would only know about the Metroids once he had arrived at SR-388, but would discover the X when he had returned to ZDR during its outbreak. Raven Beak nor any of the Morkin were at fault here. The only Chozo that may have known about any of this would have been Quiet Robe, but given he was a prisoner, he would not have had a say in anything, and so kept appropriately quiet. There would not have been any signs of infection until after the compromised Chozo was already settled on planet ZDR, where he would meet his fate and cause the downfall of the Morkin and ZDR as a whole. So that was what I believe happened when the X was brought to ZDR. It lines up with what happens in Fusion, and so I believe it to be the case with Dread 2. The Morkin were not stupid for bringing the X with them, because they didn't even know the X was with them to begin with. There is an incredibly high chance that Raven Beak didn't even know the X existed. Raven Beak was present for Samus's DNA transfusion, and likely even her training, but given how the Thoha viewed the Morkin as a whole, it was likely seen as a mutual gain for Samus to have both aspects of the Chozo. After all, she wouldn't be able to protect the galaxy if she wasn't the most capable warrior ever known. I want to thank Chozo Huntress for helping me out with this one. She checked over all of this info to make sure I got everything right. She also provided the translation for what Yoshio Sakamoto said regarding the time frame of the Metroid Rampage on SR-388. This video was meant to come out way sooner, but I had to completely redo it. And hey, I feel that this came out way better than before. The foundation is stronger, the evidence is correct this time, so there's that. Comment down below what you think of all this. Is this a legitimate explanation, or does the game logic cop-out win again? Feel free to let me know of even better ideas too. But I think that this one is the most plausible and partially founded in science too, which is always a plus. Subscribe to the channel for more upcoming Metroid videos. And with that, I've been that Metroid guy, and I will see you in the next mission. Bye bye.